Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum that explores everything pertinent to digital trust. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. So I guess my first question off of the bat, just to set the context for what's happening generally in universities and higher education, with the whole trend of information being so freely available online that you could just go onto YouTube, or there's tons of companies now through their websites, they offer courses and certificates and stuff like that. And we see folks post on LinkedIn and stuff like that they've achieved certificates or completed courses and such. So as there's been this major transformation with the flow of information, how has that affected strategy around higher ed and universities, where I guess in the past, the biggest value add for people is the diploma you get at the end of university, which has value later in your life if you're looking for a job or trying to do other stuff. Has the change in information technology availability changed strategy for higher education?
I think that's a great question. And it's really complicated, but I think there's a couple of threads that I want to pull together. So in the United States in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed an act to establish land-grant universities throughout the Union. And the purpose of those land-grant universities was to expand higher education from the sort of traditional liberal arts and humanities version of higher education into what are called agricultural and mechanical fields, which I only bring up to state that higher education has always been an evolving and changing space designed to meet the needs of individual people, of industry, and of sort of technology and growth. So if we can build from there, I think it's a great foundation to recognize that higher education institutions are designed to serve learners and designed to serve the places where learners work and grow. Now, with that being said, so that's great, 1862, that's a long time ago. I think what you're addressing here is, the true proliferation of information. I would react to that by saying that we have an opportunity and we are in a space in which there is a massive amount of addition, and recognizing this abundance of information as being valuable across the board is really important. So we have more and more and more opportunities to learn in more and more different ways, right? And modalities are also really critical. I can't go to a school to learn the trade of plumbing, but of course I can go to YouTube to understand how to fix my sink, and that is spectacular and terrific. Higher education, let's say over the past 30 years, 40 years, has continued to expand out into curriculum designed for working professionals, into curriculum that is designed to go down into K-12 to help students and learners grow. But I would say overall, higher education offers a trusted source of information and knowledge, right? So we're in the business of knowledge generation and knowledge creation as well as teaching. And to me, that is higher ed's unique value proposition.
The idea of credit mobility has been around for quite a long time. And kind of what you're describing, Matthew, is also just kind of skills mobility as well. So we've had a paradigm wherein I could acquire course credit at a 2-year institution where I might not be able to complete a full 4-year degree, but in theory, although not always in practice, that credit could be mobilized towards a larger degree. We also have had for quite a long time now the idea of, a kind of lifelong learner paradigm where my capacity for work in a certain industry is a combination of undergraduate and graduate degrees and certifications that are affiliated tangentially or directly with the kinds of attestation I could get at a higher education university. So the idea of completing a profile of attribution and capacities towards industry work is not altogether new. I think that what we see increasingly is that the kinds of bottlenecks for credit mobility, or the kinds of bottlenecks for validation of attestations of our skills, are opening up more, right? We're seeing that the kinds of skills that can be attested to or that can be learned and then qualified as credentials are opening up more. I think Kate and I are very interested in what that looks like. And, in the most basic paradigm that we're used to, right? Like, how do I guarantee that courses I've taken at a 2-year institution are going to be qualifiable at a 4-year institution, right? In a basic degree, that still is, there's still work that needs to be done to make that translation more possible. I think Kate can speak really well to how many students are unable to qualify skills and credentials they have in paradigms where we expect those should absolutely already work before we even take into the picture, like, attesting skills that I've earned through a boot camp, or language skills that I've grown up with because I grew up in a Spanish-speaking family and I should be able to attest to. I have not grown up in a Spanish-speaking family, but that one might have. So yeah, I do think those two things are really closely related. I also, I think there's a lot to be said too about just a lot of what Kate and I work with on a day-to-day basis. It's just the idea of like data mobility. How do we trust data that's moving around? And at some point, I'd love to speak more about just, I think a basic tenet of what Kate and I do, Kate through the Trusted Learner Network at Arizona State University, and myself through Fluree working on data sharing infrastructure, is to think that is a basic tenet that, data becomes more valuable to the people it belongs to when it is more shareable, when it can operate and be meaningful in a wider variety of environments. But to do that, that data has to have trust and integrity that moves along with it from environment to environment. And we can speak, I won't shoehorn this into this one topic answer, but I think it's important to think about like the history of data in terms of its formatting and in terms of its infrastructure management. Like, data's historically been very dumb to its own integrity and trust, right? Like, we trust data because we trust the perimeters we put around data. But the data itself doesn't have any kind of trust ingrained into it. And a lot of what I think opens up the possibility of credit mobility and learner-centric or self-sovereign kinds of credential management is the idea that data could be portable along with the kind of metadata that makes that data provable in the first place.
Yeah, the provenance of that data. It's we have sort of evolved this digital credentialing ecosystem. I would say in a very, very general sense, through the improvements and efficiencies of processes that are designed to allow institutions to exchange information and institutions and organizations to exchange information, because that was the sort of granularity of the value of that data at the time, right? So being able to demonstrate that I did complete these courses in order to transfer from a 2-year to a 4-year really sounds like an institutional business process. And I think that makes sense. What we get with technologies that can attest to the provenance of a piece of data, what we get when we build ecosystems that are based in trust, is the ability to dig down further into the granularity of that data, but really to put the learner-earner in the center of that conversation and allow that individual to be the exchange point through which this data goes. To Andrew's point, I think the primary hypothesis of micro-credentialing, skills-based hiring, and digital credentialing is that we are sitting on a gold mine of sort of unutilized data. And in order to realize the value of that currency, we need to put it in the hands of the folks that have earned it through their engagement with different institutions.
So I totally understand the value of making your skills or data more mobile between different participants and allowing the earner of that or the learner to be able to do it themselves. Obviously has a lot more value. What are some of the other credentials that a learner may want to amass? Like I talked about the diploma. Do you feel like the diploma is as valuable as the diploma used to be? And then what is kind of that full package of credentials you would think that one learner would like to collect during their different journeys to create value for themselves?
So I feel like a diploma is extremely valuable, right? It represents the sort of culmination or termination of a set program of study towards a specific subject that is designed to empower the learner with a both broad and deep understanding of what it is that they studied. So diploma, degree, very valuable, right? Continues to be valuable, and also sort of the strongest trust signal that we have going for us in communicating that value. When we take a step back, though, we recognize that diploma or degree is composed of a series of other credentials that might have that likely do have a very high individual value. So the average undergraduate student, when they graduate, they're going to have taken about 40 courses or about 120 credits. And each of those 40 courses represents the achievement of a set of knowledge, skills, capabilities, and we can dig down perhaps even further to that to embrace things like skills and competencies. What we have riding next to that outside of the credit-bearing space is the sort of non-credit-bearing space where we encounter all kinds of really valuable learning, whether that's professional education, whether that's experiential learning, right? Whether that's participation in particular events. So it's a really interesting question, because the question that you're essentially asking is, what do people learn and what is the value of that? Right. And everything that we wrap around this is sort of the proxy to describe that something was achieved. And so I look at that as with a huge amount of optimism and excitement that we are going to continue to move forward and learn the ways in which we all are best empowered to move forward based on what we've achieved or accomplished.
And there's probably something to be said too for, I think perhaps part of the inspiration for your question, Matthew, is also, yes, absolutely kind of micro credentials or individual skills, or as Kate mentioned, individual courses can speak a lot to candidacy and qualification of a learner for a particular industry. One of the things I think that if we're talking about the kind of democratization of higher education credential data or just skills credential data, one of the things that I think most people in that space would want is for something like an employer to be able to trust the kinds of skills and credentials a learner is coming with, because those things become increasingly transparent, as opposed to maybe a kind of archaic thing of, well, I don't know much about the degree you got or the courses you got, but it came from this like top 20 school, and like that's going to make you a lot more hireable to me than someone who might not have like, a degree from Princeton, but they have really, really well qualified skills for the kind of thing that they're applying to. I think part of the reason that we've seen this kind of archaic structure of like the value of a name attached to a degree and nothing else is because of the opacity that comes with degree and credential data. One of the things I think that makes a lot of this possible is not just the ability to trust that data hasn't been tampered with when we're talking about credential data, but also for the kinds of attribution and credentials that that data speaks to, for those themselves to become more transparent, for them to become meaningful across systems. I really hope we get some time to talk about it, but the verifiable credential standard is really based on kind of two newer things in technology. One of them is just kind of like cryptographic proof, right? That just makes it possible for data to be, with 100% certainty, not tampered with, right? So a big anxiety in the world of, I want to share my transcript from one school to another is, well, I don't want a bad faith learner to go and tamper with that. But the other huge thing is self-describing data, right? Semantic data that can be meaningful to a system that didn't itself write that data in the first place. But I think that opens up the horizon of what we can actually communicate when we're taking credentials that have been issued from a myriad number of institutions or certification platforms or just third-party kind of skills development toolkits. It opens up the realm of possibility for what we can actually start to articulate about those. And I think the world of open ecosystem RDF or JSON LD, JSON for linked data also makes it possible to start to decentralize the kinds of, like, maybe I got some skill that otherwise would be opaque to someone, but because of a network of decentralized attestations, a much more dynamic and data-centric way of kind of, I guess, what we've seen on LinkedIn, which is like, some other people can attest to the fact that I do, in fact, have this skill set. But when we think about, that not being owned by a group like LinkedIn, but made possible by the data itself, I think we can start to imagine that when you asked originally, like, does a diploma still have meaning? I actually think the answer is like, it in the vision and the implementation that we're working on, it actually has way more meaning because it says so much more in a way that can actually be, understood both by machines and people than, what just a printed out diploma framed on my wall used to be able to communicate.
I totally love that framing, Andrew, that we are going to make the diploma worth so much more because of the ability to interrogate it, to understand. We are also thinking about things like metacognition. What does it mean when an individual regards the diploma that they've earned on the wall, right? What sense of accomplishment, what sense of skill, what sense of confidence does that person get from regarding that diploma? Talking about value, what does it mean if you could ask that diploma questions about what it is that you've learned, what it is that you excelled at, what it is that you maybe struggled with in order to continue your lifelong learning journey? That's extremely powerful. And that is exactly the type of value that these sort of stackable semantic credentials can unlock for learners.
Yeah, so I guess we could reimagine the definition of a diploma with what we're talking about here. So if we just now take a step back, we're going to be discussing what this Trusted Learner Network, TLN, maybe just to take a step back of the genesis of this, how it started, why Arizona State University was behind this. And then it would be interesting to just talk a bit about some of the different participants in this ecosystem. What are the roles? And I would also be curious to understand how Arizona State University, as kind of the convener of this ecosystem or network, let's say, how the role of Arizona State has evolved over time.
Okay. All right. I had to type down some notes because we're really going to get into it. Okay. I love the idea of talking about the genesis or the story because I think that's very pertinent to the space. So in 2017, 2018, some folks, some technology leaders here at ASU recognized the value, hey, blockchain, this can provide us with a strong sense of provenance around declarative data. And wow, what a great use case to fit that into the way that we kind of credential learners through their learning journey. Immediate use cases jump to mind around simply stuff like transfer, right? 38% of all American students are going to come to a four-year university with some kind of transfer credit from another institution, which is a strong signal that people are much more mobile than maybe we initially assess them to be, right? We also know that as of really right now, there's more than 40 million students that have some college and no degree. So how do we create signals for those folks to get value out of the work that they have done in higher education? And again, going back to credit mobility, which is sort of our primary thesis, how do we make it easier for learners to traverse this enormous learning network in order to either complete degrees or find some value that helps them move forward with their lives? So 2018, 2019, we began this journey with a Trusted Learner Record, a TLR, and the Trusted Learner Network, which is the idea of a set of technologies and really a community behind it that can help move this work forward. We flirted with Hyperledger Sawtooth at first to try to figure out how we could make this technology work. We worked with several sort of ERP style vendors that were also working in blockchain in the space, primarily around supply chain. I mean, of course, digital credentials is essentially a supply chain problem as well. And as we were doing this work, we convened a group of about 100 people in 2020 at the first TLN Unconference. And the idea was, we're excited about this idea. We're interested in pursuing it. Who else is out here in the space thinking about digital credentialing? So from there, the Trusted Learner Network has really evolved into sort of a three-legged stool. And the three legs of that are, one, that we have a fundamental responsibility to create technologies that make it easy for institutions and learners to move into this space, right? If we want to generate utility in order to create a network effect, because this is only really going to be valuable to students and to institutions when we have achieved a network effect of multiple parties participating in it. So technologies is one leg of this stool. Community is another leg of this stool. So we convene our annual unconference and bring together digital credential enthusiasts and higher education institutions and vendors and experts together to have a sort of structured / unstructured conversation about how we move higher education credentialing forward. And then the third leg of that stool is the most recently evolved, which is a governance paradigm, right? So recognizing that we need to establish principles of governance that both protect and honor the learner, as well as protect and honor the institution, and also recognize the extreme value that this sort of third-party service infrastructure is going to develop off of these credentials. So We brought together a governing body of individuals from different types of institutions throughout the country to talk about, what is the role and responsibility and the right of the learner? What is the role, right, and responsibility of the institution to maintain a network in which trust and credibility are high, in which we can bring people in to participate in this ecosystem? So I think the big picture is the Trusted Learner Network is designed to recognize this opportunity in a holistic way, right? You could almost argue that the governance piece and the community piece are reactions to a reality that we encountered early on, which is it's fabulous that we can develop technologies that enact sort of cryptographic trust, that enact a sort of durability and verifiability to the data. But what we also need to do is recognize that the trust structures and the trust processes and the trust paradigms that exist right now don't necessarily translate into the future that we imagine. So one of the major things that the TLN is here and designed to do, again, to reemphasize, is how do we create utility? How do we create guidance? How do we create guidelines? And how do we create space for conversations that help us move from where we are to where we would like to be?
And there's a few things that have really appealed to me about how the TLN has orchestrated a lot of the work and the organizational structure around this. One thing, and maybe you just mentioned this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating it, but right now, ASU has kind of led the charge on establishing the grounds for this, but it's not intended to be in its lifetime an ASU managed consortium, right? Like that this does intend to become a kind of nonprofit that stands on its own, that continues to be informed by both learners and governance folks and architectural folks from across a myriad, not just four-year institutions, but a myriad of institutions around education. The other thing that I think is really great about the unconference is that, well, first of all, it does bring together experts in the space of linked data, semantic data, verifiable credentials, et cetera. That those are a lot of the same people who are actually informing the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, standards for this in a really kind of neutral and, open source way. So it's all the right people are in the room. I also think what's really great is that there is absolutely a series of vested interests for institutions to follow this journey for learner-focused and learner-centric credentials. There are also a lot of ways that has a chance to threaten a lot of the kind of institutionalization that a lot of the higher ed schools provide. What's really great is that, ASU has been, it's the provost and the chief information security officer that have been really big leaders in they see a lot of value for ASU, but they also know that a lot of that value will change a kind of power dynamic where the power has implicitly been in the hands of the institution. But there's a commitment to saying, just as you brought up earlier, Matthew, like that there are skills learned and skills gained and learned outside of the institution that need to be recognized. And how do we do that? Like how do we make sure that we are not keeping control of credential issuance from other places in the world or in the life of the learner where those things can be earned? There was a really great set of workshops at the last conference about self-attested skills and acquiring trust around self-attested skills. And I think that there's another universe where another institution was starting all of this, and would have been a forbidden topic, right? That could have never come up. So I think that's really cool. The other thing that I do think is pertinent and interesting to your question, Matthew, and to some of your response, Kate, was that absolutely the world of cryptography and blockchain has a lot to do in the enablement of what we're discussing today. It is a really interesting scenario, though, because I think a lot of people, when they think about the decentralization and autonomy of blockchain, are used to thinking about it in terms of things like, how do we bootstrap a self-sovereign currency? And this is not the landscape that we're necessarily working in, right? Like, there is an absolute degree to which we need to be able to trust. How do we make sure that the data enables native trust for a learner who is issued a credential to go out and show that off? How do we make sure that they have the sovereignty to be able to hold those credentials and display them when they want to? At the same time that we are not, insofar as ASU is accredited to issue credentials, ASU does not need to decentralize that information management architecture, right? Like we are not talking about the same idea of a self-sovereign currency where we have absolutely zero trust. if the registrar at ASU, attests to the issuance of a credential, ASU does not need to decentralize trust within the four walls of their enterprise. So a really interesting topic that I think, and this is not the only place where this is the case, right? We see this across certifying bodies everywhere, is that there is an absolute need to establish portable, trustable data that is meaningful across systems of information. At the same time that there is also a need to still enable and empower enterprise management of data. And so I think that's been a really interesting dynamic and really interesting problem. But I think that there has been a really funny way where people have seen blockchain technologies that are absolutely designed to empower and foundationalize a self-sovereign currency, and then, cryptocurrency, and then have tried to use those for what are really still enterprise data concerns. And that's just a funny fit sometimes. So it's been neat to be really kind of clear-eyed about exactly the kind of dynamic we're working with. And, not feel like we have to throw this problem at Bitcoin or something like that, right?
So I think ultimately what we're talking about here is just a digital transformation. Well, and we'll talk about the both sides. I think if we start with the supply of credentials and making them more liquid, more mobile, however we want to describe that, it's just about modernizing the different systems of records, right? ASU has a system of record for diplomas for students that go through ASU. So how do you convert that into machine readable, meaningful, trusted data, right? That's backed by solid ecosystem governance framework, like you're starting to describe a bit, Kate. Who are some of if we start with the supply side, of course, an easy issuer could be Arizona State University or a neighboring university or other universities in the United States. We also kind of described earlier in the conversation that there's alternate methods of learning or amassing skills or credits today as well. So there could potentially be other issuers outside of universities. What are some of the different types of issuers and parties that exist today within the Trusted Learner Network?
So when I think about the folks that come to our unconference, the folks that are part of our TLN community, we are talking about 4-year institutions. We're talking about 2-year institutions. We're talking about training providers that are interested in empowering their learners with durable evidence of credentials and certifications that they've received. We've also had very interesting conversations with volunteer organizations that are interested in empowering their volunteers with demonstrable proof that they have either accomplished the mastery of a skill or they've participated in a particular process or event that might provide them value in the future. I think what is really exciting and fascinating about this, and to pull back to what Andrew was talking about earlier, right? So higher education institutions already have a reputation of trust and credibility out in the sort of general hegemonic landscape, right? Out in society, we have debatable understanding of what a higher education degree will do for you. But it's really important to also remember that trust signal is built, we can drive that trust signal or that trust paradigm all the way down to the individual. Andrew and I have been working together for 18 months, and I can attest that Andrew is an excellent explainer and excellent speaker to the values of let's say, data-centric architecture. So same signal, right? But just at a completely different scale. The reason I point this out is that we can imagine this world of digital credentials going all the way from a very strong, powerful, trusted source all the way down to, Matthew, you attesting to my participation in this podcast and that participation achievement having potentially some value for me. The next time somebody asks me to do a podcast, I could say, hey, I already done this before. We should definitely do this together. So scale is an interesting question here. And I think what's exciting is that we don't really have to contend with a limit on that as far as either A, the technology goes, or B, the opportunity. The rubber meets the road, right? When we start issuing a type of credential to understand what exactly is its value. How is it being utilized by the individual for whom the credential is issued? And that's a really exciting research space that we're very, very much looking forward to encountering and engaging with, like many other digital credential providers in this area.
Have you looked at the different incentives for issuers? Like a university may have an incentive to want to digitally transform their diploma issuance process and issue a credential to give more value to learners, which could be a value add, I guess, for learners that are looking to choose an institution to learn from. Have you looked at kind of different incentives for different types of issuers? And you brought up a good point, Kate, as well. I was thinking about this before the conversation too. Self-attested or peer-attested credentials are quite interesting as well. It kind of brings in the whole conversation of reputation. If someone has a good reputation, it perhaps has more weight. That's a whole other thing. But have you thought about or looked at the different incentives for credential issuers within the context of the Trusted Learner Network?
Oh, well, so let me just really quickly, because this question of who are the issuers, I just want to speak once more to, and then I'll resurface this question of incentives for issuers, and I think I'll pass that back to you, Kate. So one thing that is, I think, really worth mentioning is that, a lot of times when people see a chart about what a verifiable credential is, they see issuers, holders, verifiers, but those are not, that does not insinuate that each of those entities at every point will themselves only just be a holder and not an issuer. And the idea of self-attested credentials obviously suggests the holder can be the issuer as well. What we've seen that becomes really neat is, and maybe just really briefly, let me just qualify for anyone who's listening to this, and we keep saying verifiable credentials, but verifiable credentials in the W3C has a very specific meaning. It's effectively you can think of it almost like an envelope, right, where the content of the envelope is the thing being attested to or attributed. It then has a space for a cryptographic proof that proves not only the integrity of the message, that it hasn't been tampered with, but also the identity of the person who has signed that message. And then they use what's called a decentralized identifier, which is also a W3C specification, that provides a means to resolve that particular key identity or DID identity to a particular document that can say more about who is the issuer, is this key valid that they've used to sign this, who attests to their identity, right? Is there a lookup chain where I can say great, apparently this is Arizona State, but who is attesting to this being Arizona State, right? So all the pieces of trust that need to go into a verifiable credential are there. The other thing is that the format for this is JSON for linked data, where every single property that's included, either in the wrapper around the credential or in the credential itself, is actually itself resolvable to an IRI that provides a method for common understanding of the meaning of this data. Okay, that was a little bit of setup to say this. One thing that we've made possible in the TLN that we're so excited about is that it becomes possible when we think of issuers and verifiers that would provide value to a learner to be very, very clear about the data that they would need to have access to provide meaningful value to a learner. Maybe I'm a learner who has credentials from Arizona State University, that has credentials from Maricopa County 2-year institutions, that also has open badge credentials that have been issued that certify that I'm certified as a lifeguard, right? What becomes really neat is that the kinds of that not just employers, right, might be on the verifier side, but there might be a whole ecosystem. And we already know of a pretty solid ecosystem that exists that would be able to say, hey, I don't know what data you have yet. You haven't shared that with me. But because there's a set of public vocabularies that make all of this possible, I can tell you that if I have this service that's free to use, and if you had data on these properties and these published vocabularies, I could run this analytic that could give you so much more information about jobs that are available, about transfer equivalents, about the kinds of credits that would be acknowledged at other schools or institutions, et cetera. And then those themselves oftentimes can be verifiable credentials, right? So there's this ecosystem that opens up where it's not just the schools that are issuing something, but it might be a group like Smart Resume that says, hey, we actually, a lot of the courses, the credentials you're showing us, we actually already have skills alignment to those credentials, and we can actually provide you some verifiable attestation that you have this level of competency at these skills. And that becomes its own credential. And so when we start thinking about the learner able to go out and leverage the credentials from one issuer to even get other credentials that speak to skills or transfer equivalency or jobs alignment, et cetera, it also becomes really neat because maybe there's a job out there that requires someone to be lifeguard certified, and they want to know that they also have a series of credentials from a higher ed institution, but they're actually a lot more willing. Their level of trust is a lot more open for saying you're lifeguard certified. So the idea that a student could go out and have a third party issued credential about lifeguard certification, and then a bunch of higher ed credentials from ASU, and then suddenly presenting this kind of picture of their skills, they're able to kind of access an alignment to or a pathway towards a job that merges a lot of those issued credentials, is another really important piece for us, right? That the kinds of value the learners can get out of their credentials don't stop with just the credentials from that four-year institution. Okay. Oh, but the question asked was, sorry, because I hijacked that one. The question asked was not just about who are the issuers, but
oh yeah, what's the value to the issuer? Yeah,
what's the value to the issuers? Yes.
I also got super distracted because I could likewise pontificate about this idea that when we develop and put out into the world at the behest of the specific learner a rich data set about what they've accomplished or achieved, there's just a whole horizon of possibility of what a learner can do with that data, or what a service could help a learner understand about that data. And it is about, again, it's about discovery, about opportunity. We're talking to somebody, the TLN is speaking with somebody about a program that they have in which they utilize this data, model it, and then provide folks with sort of Upwork possibilities, right? So you work in a convenience store. Wow, you've developed a lot of skills that would translate into a much higher paying role or position in a different industry. What do you want some help completing a resume in order to move forward? So we're talking about stuff that could really unlock things like economic prosperity. We're talking about things that could unlock new learning opportunities. It's really, really exciting. But to go back to Matthew, your point, what is in it for the issuer is sort of, I think, is the generalized question. And I think when we talk about the power of JSON LD and the opportunity to bring in like sort of truly self-describing data, the most natural first step we can take there is opportunities to unlock efficiencies, right? Between systems, right? Between systems that don't hardly ever talk to each other. So in the current world we live in, like an institution to institution workflow, or an institution to, say, job opportunity workflow, there's a huge amount of sort of ETL extraction transformation load that needs to happen in order to be able to traverse the translation of that data from my system into your system. And this is, I know it's pretty low hanging fruit, but as somebody that really is moved by the power of infrastructure to either push us forward or move us back, I think that that's a really valuable value proposition that this type of system offers. So speed, efficiency, placing the learner in the center to allow that learner to make the best choices for them, creating spaces for new competition that can enliven and move forward the entire industry. Those are some of the most powerful things.
I was also thinking too, like that different types of issuers, just getting like a reference from someone or making it easier for someone to give a reference to someone else is valuable too, right? It's like just having a professor give you a reference as a student that you were a good student in their course or you did well in that, versus having to just have the institution itself, I guess, to do an issuance. I don't know if that's something that is being looked at as well, because I feel like often it's obviously different incentives. It's tough to get things prioritized at times with large organizations, and especially when there's like this level of digital transformation that needs to happen. But it is very clear that with the numbers you gave, 38% of students coming into a US university are coming through some sort of transfer. There's obviously a big business case right there for all of the higher educated, the 4-year or 2-year colleges to kind of buy into this. But it's also like the incentive, it's kind of the human just kindness incentive as well, right? Like if I'm someone's professor or if I'm someone's employer even, like I'd be more than happy to give them a credential to just commend them for their good work or their achievements.
Yeah, I think you're making a really interesting point. And actually one of the things that makes me feel so passionate about higher education is that we think about an institution with a capital I. We think about Arizona State University, and I look at my diploma on the wall and it says ASU, and it says my College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. But inside of an institution these are little cities, right? That folks move to and spend some time here, and then they move away, or maybe they stay forever, like me, who has 2 degrees from ASU and has worked here for 10 years. But these little cities are full of opportunities, of programs, of engagements. And I think about working with our student services group and our athletics, recreation and athletics group, right? And so we have a number of people that are running programs designed to help students achieve wellness in their lives, right? So credentialing something like a deadlift competition is something that we can say, oh, that's right, that's fine, low value, low impact, who cares? But then I think about the kinesiology student who is going to get an internship or going to get their first job, and like, what is the package of credentials that's going to help them say, like, I'm right for this job. I build teams, I participate, I'm a lot of fun, I'm here to improve your work. So I think what we're talking about here is how can we help folks ultimately describe a more holistic, a more meaningful version of themselves, right? Beyond the piece of paper on the wall, beyond the transcript. Like, who am I as a person, as a student, as somebody that works, as somebody that has passions? This work opens up that possibility.
I think too that, so much of the kind of use case, the just general data value, the value unlocked in the data, and then the use case scenario, like, we've had a kind of myopic view of this that hasn't let us hasn't allowed us to imagine the horizon of possibilities, in part because we're so used to data only having value in the kind of silo where it's, meaningful to other machines. And, we're used to the idea of like relational data, right? Like ASU knows how to qualify a course against a set of requirements for degree completion. And, obviously there are like relational structures and like SQL-shaped data that make that possible inside of the walls of an enterprise. But we're not used to the possibility of like, folks in the semantic space are familiar with the term knowledge graph. The idea being that once you have an open world, an ability to relate data in an open world and not closed world model, the knowledge or the insight generation that gets unlocked when that data can carry relational meaning as it moves throughout the world and kind of accrue that meaning over time becomes exponential. And so there's a lot of scenarios that have become possible only and discoverable, only once this kind of infrastructure foundation started to make that shift. So like, Kate's made me aware of the fact that 2-year institutions are a lot of times funded based on the amount of their students who go on to complete a like general education requirements at another at a 4-year institution or at another 2-year institution. But that idea of that visibility of the relationships between students who have earned credentials at one place and another place, that's been so closed off for so long that it's been really difficult to qualify that, but it has immense value for 2-year institutions to understand that. So that's one example of a kind of issue or value there that becomes immediately obvious once you start to imagine being able to, especially when a learner consents to that kind of data sharing, opening up the kind of value for that issuer. But I also think that, in the world of a 4-year institution, making these credentials both A, portable, and B, meaningful, when we think about the idea of being actually able to globally relate, an achievement to completion assertion. And then once, let's say a learner gets all these credentials from ASU, they go out and they work with a service, a service that like a skills alignment or skills triangulation service that says, hey, we actually have established a lot of data to be able to articulate what certain courses end up meaning in terms of employable industrial skills. And we can now come in and qualify that these courses that you took that can be identified globally as, courses issued by ASU actually align to these skills. And another framework or another service out there can actually align those skills to specific like past job hires. Right. What we actually end up having that the learner ends up accruing on their own with their own management of their own data is a kind of really, really valuable set of knowledge of how individual courses and achievements and credentials that maybe an institution they're only aware of that pick point of the data. But there does become this pathway in the future where then students who are willing to come back and share that data with ASU provide ASU with a really, really rich network of data in the life of this learner and where they've taken those credentials to those skills, to those jobs that then becomes, a massive, kind of data analytic or just kind of knowledge opportunity for ASU. Again, assuming that learner is willing to kind of come back and share that information. The ability to relate that data across myriad different spaces and connecting that, generating that insight, connecting to that knowledge is something that just is never possible in a world where the best way that an institution can share a learner's credential data is with a signed transcript, right? Like that's just not, you can never bring that data back and get the value of that data unlocked in the future. So I think that there is a big, it seems kind of big picture, like long-term horizon, but the foundations for that kind of knowledge or the kind of relationship across these different spaces is already open the very moment that we start working with semantically self-describing data.
I love the big vision. I love those types of conversations. And because the data is mobile, ASU is not also just restricted to getting data back from an ASU graduate. They could, in fact, get it back from anyone and have good context around that and use it for analytics or improving programs, improving value, whatever you kind of are able to create a larger circle, I guess, there. I think one of the big values as well, which is just underestimated, is just the ability to sign data, especially when we're talking about the self-attested or just like peer attested. It's just like the fact that with these technologies we're able to sign is very meaningful in its own. But then we kind of get to the follow-up questions behind that is like, what is the meaning of what was signed? What is the authoritativeness of what was signed? And that kind of gets us talking about governance a little bit. What issuer is authoritative for what types of data? Who could sign what types of data? So in the context of the trusted learner network, it might be a good opportunity now to talk a little bit. You mentioned ecosystem governance a bit, Kate, earlier in the conversation, but just to talk a little bit more about how that has been looked at so far, because I'm assuming ASU is, obviously there's use cases where ASU is an issuer. There's also going to be participation of ASU within kind of the governance body and setting up the rules of the game to make sure that not only could data be signed in mobile, but you want it also to be authentic or trusted, right?
Right, or of a certain quality. So the way that we kind of came to this governance conversation, and again, we keep talking about ASU, but when we're talking about the Trusted Learner Network, I'll just reify what Andrew said. So ASU, this is sort of a powered by model because this is something that we feel passionately about and something that we passionately want to be able to take advantage of, right? To participate in a network where multiple institutions are executing in this way. But that governing body being comprised of folks from other 4-year institutions, from 2-year institutions, rural, urban, public, private, really crucial and central to our principles, right? This is not just about us. This is about how we how we move forward in this space for learners and for institutions both. So, sorry, going back to the governance component, early on, I think we confronted this fact that, again, it is fabulous that we can cryptographically sign these envelopes and deliver data in a way that is new and novel and really powerful. But for the average institutional administrator, for the average person, how and when will we evolve in order to be able to understand and sort of accept these new trust paradigms, right? Which is just another way to say, Matthew, if I get a verifiable credential and it says that it's signed by Arizona State University, but I don't know what a trust registry is, and I don't know what self-sovereign ID is, and I don't know what cryptographically signed proofs are, I am probably very susceptible to being duped or tricked, right? So we just kind of don't understand what this new space is. I don't want to say duped or tricked, I guess. We just don't know how to navigate this new trust paradigm yet. I think institutionally, technically, et cetera, et cetera. So when I get something that says ASU issued you a diploma in engineering and I say, wait a second, it didn't, am I going to have the skills to be able to investigate and confirm, was that issuer who they said they were? Was that issuer somebody that set something up on an AWS account in order to be able to generate these credentials? We don't know. Ipso facto, how do we build governance in a way that honors the way that we handle this trust now and can help us move forward into trust in the future? So, for instance, to participate as a institutional member of the Trusted Learner Network, you have to agree to a certain set of quality rules, right? So you have to agree that the data that you're going to put on the Trusted Learner Network is going to be of a high enough quality that it generates trust rather than doesn't generate trust, right? So no largely blank credentials. But also there are baseline trust rules that we can establish that honor, again, the current paradigm that we're in, which is to say that if you're an institution that wants to issue a degree on the Trusted Learner Network to utilize the tools of the TLN to issue a degree, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're accredited to issue degrees, right? Pretty simple, very strong signal that we already have that is trusted. So we want people to be able to say, oh, this credential came from the TLN and it's a diploma. All right. We believe that. We believe that the TLN has done their due diligence to observe that and to check that. Same thing with courses. Where it starts to get really weird and fun and interesting and where the governance is really, the rubber is going to meet the road, is when we move outside of the credit paradigm, right? So how do you determine if a barber's license is a valid assertion from a valid source? One of the big reasons why we sort of came up with this fractal governance policy is that, I don't know, we're all representatives from a bunch of higher education institutions, which is to say that we don't know. And so what our job is in that space is to enact governance, to identify the experts in those spaces that can come and participate and sort of create governance by those for whom will be governed. If we're going to start issuing barber's licenses, we're going to go out and find some folks that are very familiar with barber licensure, and we're going to ask them to help us create what those baseline rules should be.
The standards for digital identity from the W3C have specified basically a great way of a kind of trust attestation chain of who someone is. So not just like the attribution that a credential might say about someone, but also a trust attestation of like, okay, great, this verifiable credential says it was issued by Arizona State, but like, how do I make sure it's Arizona State? Like, how can I crawl up that trust chain to know who certified that? What's powerful about it is, well, first of all, that there's a series of protocols that make it machine traversable. And what it ends up ultimately looking like, or the structure of it enables something very similar to what we already have on the internet with certifying authorities around like websites and domain ownership. So, you know, when I go and type in google.com, there's a pathway for that kind of DNS lookup to say, well, like, I don't necessarily know that the response I got is like, I don't know the server who gave me this response that qualifies this fact, but the authority that, you know, but I do know the certifying authority that like has certified them themselves, right? So there's an ability of saying like, I don't have to trust everyone. I just have to trust the person. Like, I just have to go up to a point of certification where I do trust that. I trust them to say things factually about, you know, everything below them. And so I do think that what becomes powerful here is, well, and there's a lot to be said about this, because I do think that it opens up a world of like authorization and self-identification where you can start to even think about like replacing, you know, Google OAuth and stuff like, or, you know, Google or Facebook or GitHub-based OAuth with actually like, you know, I am being presented with an identity by this person and I don't know it, but all I need to know is that they're a student at ASU and I trust ASU to say that fact. And so like I can actually do authorization data access for this person without actually knowing them directly. And so we can see a decentralization there. But in the world of issuers, especially issuers of different types of credentials, like Kate said, part of that work is just going to be to say we just need to know effectively the kind of accreditors. And if we can trace back identity related trust around issuance just to those. And if we can also specify like, you know, I don't trust necessarily ASU to say that I'm like eligible to fly on a rocket ship to the moon, but I trust them to say that I'm a student or, you know, whatever. Like, if we go back and we say, I'm willing to trust these institutions to say these things, then we open up a pathway of saying like, oh, great. Well, I want to make sure that they could issue liberal arts degrees, and like that I can prove back enough to be able to justify that. And to Kate's point too, we already have a problem with digital literacy, right? Like, most people don't know how their identity is like reconciled on the internet, period. So, you know, there is a lot of that. I think we have a lot of that we're facing now, and we've had lots of conversations of like, how do we provide digital literacy around all of this, coming from a place where but most people using it won't already have digital literacy of how it was happening before. But I think we just want to make sure that it's valuable to the folks that are using it, and that they, as Kate said, won't get tricked by any of that.
Yeah, it really comes back to, again, the Trusted Learner Network, our desire to be a bridge between the way that we are executing the reality of digital credentials now and a future in which we envision all of these terrific technologies being in place and understood and sort of interoperated through all of our processes. So getting from where we are, in which we are utilizing a certain set of trust structures around accreditation, et cetera, to where we need to go.
Yeah, I think being able to use the existing trust structures is kind of the easiest way to get up and going. And I think both you and I, Kate, were at IAW, and one thing I've just this past week, IAW 37, one of the things I've kind of noticed over the last few IAWs is just more and more conversation around governance and less around technology, as people, I think, are noticing that needing to properly authenticate signers of data and verify the authoritativeness of issuers or signers of data is quite important in enabling these things to flourish. It makes you wonder, though, as well, like, one of the most, or if not the most important thing for adoption of this is going to be the user experience, how easy it is for people to use and how they perceive the value of it as they're using and interacting with an interface. So you do wonder if it's up to, like, needing to help someone make a trust decision by going through all these different steps is probably not going to be a scalable, like, thing to do for absolutely everyone. For us talking here that we're so involved in this space, it interests us, but just having a very slick UX, you would imagine that the UX provider, whether it's a wallet provider, will just facilitate the presentation of verified or authoritative profiles and stuff like that as well. So within the project, have you been building wallets or looking at wallet UX, and what is the vision around wallets? I think it's a large question, but where are the learner credentials going to sit in?
Yeah. Oh, so IAW, this was my first IAW, and just, a huge shout out to the organizers of that event. I know I had an incredible time and will definitely be back because the conversation was just really lively. It was kinetic and it was really diverse and dynamic. So extremely cool. To go to the question of, so there's all the really cool stuff that we can do from a technology perspective, and how does that translate actually out to an individual learner or even an administrator or a third-party service provider? So UX has been, how we present this information has been really high on our minds with the TLN from its inception. And actually ASU, in order to sort of meet this challenge and build diverse understanding of it, we started an initiative in 2020 in which we built a wallet and continue to iterate on it now, that wallet being called ASU Pocket, right? So that's a mobile specific wallet that is built on the Did Aries Indy ledger combination. And the idea there was, well, how do we actually tell the story to learners that they have these credentials inside of their wallet, that those credentials present a certain type of fragility when they exist on the mobile wallet, but also a certain types of strength, right, and extensibility. We've been exploring that all along. When we think about the Trusted Learner Network in combination with the wallet, one of the major drivers for the Trusted Learner Network and the architecture of decentralization across nodes, in the Trusted Learner Network, when an individual engages with the TLN, they are engaging with it through a web app that basically virtualizes data across multiple decentralized nodes in order for the learner to execute things like consent changes on that data or the issuance of that data into a verifiable credential that can go into a wallet. The reason that we wanted to do that is recognizing fundamentally that the current trust paradigm now is sort of a feature and a bug, right? So I, Kate Giovacchini, get my beautiful diploma from Arizona State University. I hang it up on the wall. And then when I immediately move, 3 months later after that, I lose the diploma in the moving process and I no longer have it. it is a feature that I can go back to my institution and say, hey, can you send me a new diploma? Because I'd really like to get a new frame. So recognizing that perhaps this paradigm extends beyond, right? So if a wallet means issuing a credential, and then when I drop my phone in the drain and I need to go back and reissue everything back to that wallet, maybe we have an opportunity with the TLN to provide a more stable vault-like space where learners can return again and again to re-up onto new wallets credentials that might be valuable for them in their particular use cases. The UX is critical, and we are going to both need to teach and learn a whole new set of language around how to manage credentials that are sort of verifiable or distanced from the institutions that we have for a long time trusted to maintain those for us, right? We have to learn a new set of skills in order to be able to engage with things like wallets. What the TLN is doing with Pocket, with our wallet experiment and with our digital repository technologies, is we are constantly working to develop the best user experience for learners that are at different stages, right? Which is I don't know what a wallet is, and I am not interested in learning. I need to share my credentials from my community college to my new institution. What is the least amount of clicks that gets me there, right? To B, I'm curious about a wallet. I'm going out to get a job or an internship, and they're asking me for verifiable credentials. What do I do with this? How do I share this? How do I move forward? All the way to, I am a sophisticated user in this space. I've had a Coinbase wallet since I was 14 years old. Let's do this. Give me my credentials. I'm going to manage them in all the ways that I know how to do. So really, ultimately, when we're thinking about the UX challenge, we're thinking about how do we serve all of those different types of learners, and how do we create like really safe space for those folks that maybe have the least amount of sophistication with those technologies, because they also, if they are not benefiting from this, then we have failed.
Some of the path for UX for wallets, I think, is easy, and some of the path is hard. Part of it's easy because so much of the data for really rich UX, very rich and clarifying UX, is available to the wallet issuer with the wallet technology with a verifiable credential, right? So like, let's say I just got this arbitrary credential. If it's properly in JSON LD and verifiable credentials, then I can actually do a lookup on all of those properties and like find more metadata about what it means to say like, what does course completion date mean, right? What does in theory, the being able to look up the meaning of these things becomes more possible by a wallet or thanks to these semantic vocabularies. And so the wallet technology has a lot of resources at its disposal to be able to try to produce more knowledge to the holder or to the verifier than they would typically. They also, the whole idea behind DID methods, decentralized identifier methods, is that they produce if I see something that says DID Ethereum and then a unique identifier after it, the DID Ethereum method is published in a way where I could actually look that up to get the document that says more about who this identity is and who attests to that. What's kind of a mess right now is if you, a really great example of this is like there are, I think, 200 something known published DID methods today. So being able to track like how do I resolve a DID method for Ethereum versus, Hyperledger ND versus Fluree, whatever, becomes a little bit of a mess. And the idea of a universal resolver being able to do that and a wallet technology being able to leverage that is still, it feels a little bit like the Wild West. So the good news is the promise of the standard is actually like there is so much richness to the data that goes into a verifiable credential that wallets have so many tools at their disposal to make that data meaningful, not just to other machines, but to people through UI. I think that the part of that problem, part of the problem still is though, like, how do we need a little bit of consortial organization around so many of the pieces that make it take advantage of this linking of data in an open ecosystem that, is getting better in part thanks to groups like the TLN, but, is still getting difficult. And there's only one more thing I was going to really quickly say, which is that one thing that I think a lot of issuers haven't done a lot of good due diligence to think through is that right now, when you issue a credential, you are wrapping that data in a signature, technically. But that means like I got my degree from the University of Virginia in 2010. Like, was it issued in 2010 or was it issued when I went to the University of Virginia and asked for that data? And then how do we speak more to like it's great that UVA is willing to give me, is willing to like sign this credential if I go to them and ask for a new credential. But, there is, I think, in a lot of the folks thinking about verifiable credential issuance, the proof of issuance starts and stops at the moment where I go ask for that credential for my wallet. One of the reasons that I think I'm really excited that the TLN has come to Fluree and that we've partnered on this is that, Fluree does database management with these same semantic standards. So everything is JSON LD from top to bottom, and everything uses the same cryptography as, goes into the kind of cryptographic suites that are supported by the verifiable credential spec, which means that at the system of record label, if I'm updating someone's grade on a course from X to Y, or I found out that someone cheated on an exam and I'm kind of revoking a credential. Every single kind of operation against data at the fact level is itself provable back to who issued something and when and under what context. And I do think that that's going to be something that the larger space of verifiable credentials is going to need to figure out, that if there's not a mechanism or if there's not a kind of protocol for data management that's being used that can maintain the provenance of trust back to the kind of system of record touch points when that data was issued, updated, destroyed, et cetera, then there are going to be some fragility points, Kate, like you mentioned, of, great, I see that this credential was issued at such and such a time, but like, is it still active? Do I know how to go kind of check this to sync with that? Do I know if if I'm a learner and I suddenly went back to sync my credentials and I'm like, wait a second, I got an A in this course. Why is it saying that I got an F? Like, who did that? Who said that? Like, how can I want to audit the data. I want to know why that was changed and by whom. So I think that there are a lot of trust questions that come out of this too, that eventually will be useful to wallets and UX. But I think that if we don't have some of those things figured out by the time learners start to really use this, then there's going to be a lot of things that not only they don't understand, but maybe like the issuers themselves don't understand too.
To close up the conversation, we've talked about the network governance, some of the issuers, the process of onboarding issuers. We've talked a bit about wallet infrastructure for learners being the holders. When you look at the verifiers, and that's kind of the crucial piece here, because although you're providing value to the learners, the value is unlocked for them because they can do stuff with someone that needs to rely on data that they provide to them. That's business case typically lies there. So when you look at verifiers within the network, and it kind of ties into, I guess, the focus on initial use cases, are you looking to work with verifiers who are going to be the issuers as well, that could kind of consume data either from themselves or within the same ecosystem? It's more of a question of like, how do you spur the adoption, right? And so what is the whole thought around working with verifiers, different types of verifiers, and how that maybe maps to use case prioritization?
So big verification use cases that I'm interested in and that the TLN is interested in are those that bring value to the learner. So there is the sort of institution to institution verification component. And then there's that sort of learner to employment component. I love the idea that if you are an issuer and a verifier, that somehow makes your life easier, because I think it's actually it's not the opposite, but if the system that you issue from and then the system that you verify with are the same, maybe you're in better shape. But I think what we find is that organizations, right, are composed of a series of moderately interoperable applications for which we, have been an executive director of engineering here at ASU, recognizing that like a huge amount of the work that we do inside of the shop is making sure that pieces of the shop talk to each other. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it does make me laugh. It's like, I can send something out, but can I receive it? Well, that's a totally different process, and we're going to have to figure it out and talk to me in a year. But to pull back, yeah, use cases for verification of an institution to institution, really critical. Verification of a learner sharing credentials into, say, an employment opportunity. I think what makes me optimistic about this is that all of the systems that we have that are designed to accept the credentials of today can be designed and modified to accept the credentials of tomorrow, right? The functional difference between accepting to Andrew's point, a CSV that contains, or maybe an XML that contains a transcript, and accepting a JSON LD object, that's not a terribly huge lift to modify there. And we're all operating in a world in which we're constantly transforming and accepting new forms of data in order to accomplish the business that we need to accomplish. So I'm feeling optimistic. That's the direction that we're going to go.
One thing that has been almost like a miracle is, and I will say it's like thanks to some people who are like reaching across the aisle really nicely with, so there's the W3C also has community groups like the Verifiable Credential API group, where the standard for sharing on a kind of issue consume basis is has been set in place. And then there's groups like Jobs for the Future who convene issuers and verifiers and wallet technologies to make sure that like, hey, as long as you all are working with these interoperable standards, it's smooth like butter. Is that even a phrase? And so what we found is, there have been, because we've built against these standards the whole time, Fluree is built on the standards top to bottom, TLNs use the standards top to bottom. We found that we'll find a wallet technology or we'll find a verifier. And because they've been standards motivated by being standards compliance themselves, we'll find that the actual integration, we do literally no work, right? Like they're using the VC API for receiving credentials. We're using the VC API for issuing credentials. We literally can have learners in the TLN use their wallet with no integration work on our part. Or they're a verifier and we can literally have them leverage data and produce valuable information back to a learner with no integration on our part. And I think that part's just like really cool. I mean, that's the promise of interoperability standards always, but it just never feels like it works in reality. To see that actually work in reality, like when we heard about LearnCard, is that the Learning Education Foundation? I forget. Yeah.
Learning Economy Foundation.
Learning Economy Foundation. When we found out about LearnCard, we were like, hey, let's block off a little bit of time to see if we can get TLN learners putting credentials into LearnCard. And it turned out we didn't need any of that time because it just worked. So that's beautiful when it happens. I also do think that there's a lot to be said about the other thing that's been really neat is when we think about someone coming and saying like, hey, we would love to provide this service to learners. Here's what we need, like, here's the data that we operationalize to do our analytic. And we realize that they're using the same published vocabulary that we're using. It's also as simple as literally when that service comes to sign up, they're like, hey, here are the kind of classes of data and the properties on those data that we need minimally to be able to provide this value. They can kind of register that service with that. And then the ability to tell a learner like, hey, when we run these federated queries to virtualize your credential data across all these institutions, like without even having to see that data, just knowing the kinds of properties that are returned on that data, we can tell you like you would right now immediately with no other work done be able to find out, or be able to produce a kind of digital smart resume for all of your credentials. Like those kinds of things that open up because of the standards for shared meaning and vocabularies and the standards of shared meaning via the like verifiable credential API through the W3C. When they work like magic, and it's just been really neat to start to see that. I think that the idea of ballooning the ecosystem that we're generating into a like much larger one is way less intimidating than it has been in my historic work as a technologist. Being like, how do we integrate all the players in this triangle? Typically that's a question that's like, okay, well, we need to get that's a $30 million exercise, right? And the fact that it just like works natively is really neat.
Yeah, and that's having started different ecosystems. That's the good and scary part at the same time, where you want to make sure you have the right governance and structure in place before the thing starts growing very fast. But at the same time, that's the objective, that there's no one centrally controlling this thing, and anyone that wants to participate, as long as they could speak the same language, well, go for it. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed these conversations as much as I do. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on the platform of your choice to make sure you're notified of new episodes that may be of interest to you. If you're looking to connect, feel free to reach out directly to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Catch you all later.